Hey guys, Xerath Diff here. We're playing again for Season 16, so if you're one of the people, I think one of the, maybe 70 people who subscribed to the channel, and you liked the content that you saw last time around in Season 15, well, then you're in luck, because more videos are coming out. And today I want to talk about an item that I think is super underrated on this character, particularly for this new season, but honestly it may have been a sleeper item in past seasons as well. I don't quite remember the stats or if anything were changed, but who cares about last season, right? We only care about this season, and that item is Stormsurge. So we'll take a look at this item, and on the surface I think a lot of people don't think of it as anything too special, but I want to break down why I think this is honestly one of Xerath's best items, and I pretty much build it in almost like every game I play, honestly. There may be like 5% of games I would estimate that I don't build this item. I guess I should probably cover where I don't build it first. So if I was playing against like a super tanky roster, like think tank support, maybe even something like Ezreal AD carry, which builds a little bit more HP than normal, or any AD carry that maybe like if it was like a tank Vayne or something like that, Galio mid, Malphite top, and then some bruiser / tank jungler. Maybe in a team like that, I wouldn't build Stormsurge. But even then, we may build it, and we'll talk about why a little bit later. And it has nothing to do with really Squall, which is what most people think about when they look at this item. They look at this item and they see Squall, like, okay, a little bit extra burst damage, but it doesn't really help me that much. Whenever I build this item, if I built it in the past, maybe I see at the end of the game it doesn't really do that much on the overall, because you can mouse over the item, see how much damage it's done to champions. And that's kind of how they're evaluating this item, right? How much of the damage to champions do you see at the end of the game? And that's kind of like the wrong way to go about it. This is a fantastic item for a great price that has lots of stats that you want in Xerath, and we'll kind of go through the stats, and then we'll talk about Squall a little bit later, and then we'll talk about some of those niche cases where maybe you don't want to build it. We'll also show you some kind of interesting tech with it that I'm sure has been explained before, but I think a lot of people aren't aware of. So first of all, the item is, I believe, 102% gold efficient, if you look it up on LoL Wiki. And it's not just about gold efficiency. Gold efficiency can sometimes be a bit of a trap. Just to give you an example, there's a popular kind of Ezreal fringe build that's going on right now where they stack a bunch of mana. And if you look at this build in the gold efficiency terms, right, it looks really strong because all these items have kind of an insane amount of gold efficiency. And you're like, well, how could you go wrong? The problem really is that even when you have something like Manamune, right, mana doesn't become Ezreal's best stat because you're using the mana to derive attack power from it, right? The mana itself isn't really an end to anything. It's just kind of like dead stat, if that makes sense. Like, as long as you're not going on Ezreal, which you're not really benefiting from all that mana. So there's some cases where a stat like gold efficiency can be highly misleading. This is not one of those cases at all. Because all the stats are basically combat stats that we want on Xerath. What are they? Ability power, 90. This is relatively high, especially for an item that's 2,800, 2,800 gold, right? You're not going to get much higher than that. Shadow Flame is, I think, like 110 or 115. That's 3,200. 15 Magic Pen. This is identical to Shadow Flame, okay? Much lower price point. And then you have 6% movement speed. Now, this is where this item really stands out in my opinion. So if you buy tier 2 boots and you don't have any augmentation, so you have no movement speed runes or anything, you're just tier 2 boots, you end up with 385 movement speed. So buying this one item jumps you up 23 movement speed, which is kind of insane when you think about it. You can feel the difference just building this item, okay? Now, if you add a movement speed rune on top, which I do in some of my games, I'm still testing some of the rune stuff. The runes I'll talk about in a different video, but the gist of it is that things like movement speed are good, okay? The ability haste in the tier 1 can be good, but the tricky part is that you want to make sure, especially if you're playing carry Xerath, so mid or bot Xerath, you want to make sure that you have enough AP to make the early game easy for you and to be able to get the push and stuff like that. So that's really where kind of digging into the minutia there becomes important. And that's why I don't really feel comfortable sharing my thoughts on should you take the rune, should you not. But if you do take the movement speed rune, you bump up to around 417 MS, which is really strong. Sorry, it's not. No, I don't think it's 417. No, it is. Yeah, it's 417 because you get like an extra 9, which is quite strong. Now, you can't really simulate this super well, but if you add on, we'll actually go back to base here so we can buy. I had to go to the tower because you get home guards when you're in base now. It's kind of annoying, right? Well, actually, we can reset. Yeah, we'll reset that. And we'll just buy some movement speed items to just show you, simulate if you were to have a Soul Stealer, because we can't buy one because we can't stack it in the practice tool because it's, 2026 and we just don't have the technology to stack items in the practice tool. It's just really hard for poor Riot, so gotta cut them some slack there. And I'm going to buy 2 separate items just to make sure. I don't think the effect is unique or anything. We'll go back out to the tower here. So we have like 2% movement speed missing, so it's going to be a little bit higher. And when we get to an area here where we don't have the home guards on, yeah, so we're at 434. If you have the movement speed rune, this goes up to 442. So you actually gain less from the rune as you go higher. Something to keep in mind. So if you're going to be building, Zanya's every game, not Zanya's, sorry, Magi's every game, the value that you get from the movement speed rune kind of goes down because you kind of reach a point of diminishing returns. This is so that, you can't just have this super fast character that zooms all over the map. But this movement speed is really quite important on this champion for a lot of reasons. First of all, just general movement speed is great for traversing the map, right? We have teleport a lot of times if we're a mid or bot, but even then, just being able to swap lanes without that is great, especially because one of your primary roles as Xerath is wave clear, right? So being able to get from, top to mid to bot quicker is always great. Another thing, too, is even being able to kind of walk up and then walk back when you're clearing a wave is important because you can't really see the minions spawning right now, but obviously they tend to come in a line, and what you really want to be doing on Xerath the wave clear is kind of like charging your Q, getting them all in the line, and then dipping back out. And a lot of people think Xerath has super good wave clear, and it can be really good in some cases, right? But you can leave yourself a little bit exposed because it takes a while for your Q to charge, and you're kind of vulnerable during that time. So it's nice to be faster while you're charging your Q, and then you can also dip back kind of quicker. So you kind of come out, pop the wave, and then just immediately come back, right? Now, movement speed in general, just a great stat for dodging stuff, right? Makes the character just feel a lot better play, especially because a character like this is supposed to be immobile. You don't have any dashes, you don't have any movement speed that comes with a kit. So forcing movement speed on the outside feels really good. And kind of like the final thing I want to mention about movement speed in particular is how it affects your Q. So your Q slows you, like it basically gradually slows you up to 50%. And the only way to really counteract this is with slow resist or more movement speed. And you're not going to notice a huge difference having the extra movement speed from maybe just the Stormsurge alone or just the movement speed rune alone. But when you combine the movement speed rune with Stormsurge with Magi's, keep in mind we would be at 442 with the rune if we decided to take that, and it would go higher than that. It'd be around like 450-ish, because remember we're missing an additional 2%, which is around an extra 7, so it'd probably be like 449 if we could actually simulate the Magi's in game, which is a crazy amount of movement speed for an AP caster to have, and it really just actually effectively increases the range on your Q, right? Because a lot of times you're trying to shoot the spell from max range when you get into an actual kind of sieging or late game scenario. You don't want to be like up here trying to shoot a target over here, right? You want to be kind of back here, and then you're inching forward, and the more you can inch forward, the more it kind of extends your range on your shot. It also makes you more mobile while in your shot, so you can dodge better, right? And you really do notice this difference, especially once you get the Magi's. There's a huge difference between just being at 385 and basically close to like 450, even if you're at 440. Let's say you don't have the movement speed rune or something, that's absolutely fine. Huge difference between being at 385 and 440. So the movement speed on this item is super underrated. And let's talk about the proc a little bit, because I think people, they tend to look at the proc and they're like, oh, you know, all that sounds great, but the proc in this item is just so trash, man. Like, why would I ever use this item? It doesn't make any sense. Whenever I build it, I basically do no damage by the end of the game. And we'll kind of teleport back to base here, and we'll do a couple shots on the dummy. But something that people don't really take into account is that you're not getting any superfluous damage with Stormsurge. With Ludens, you get tons of superfluous damage, right? Because you hit a creep and it bounces to, you know, a target, it's counting as Ludens damage. That's probably just that might even get healed back by their regen in some cases, right? Or very small amounts of lifesteal. And it's kind of like the same thing sometimes with items like Blackfire Torch or even Liandry's. I'm a big Liandry's fan on a lot of characters. You're going to see that come into a lot of the Vel'Koz builds we talk about when we do videos on Vel'Koz later on the channel. However, there can be times where Liandry's, you know, as great as it is, just is doing pad damage on certain things, right? So not every point of damage is created equal. And I actually kind of like the fact that you have to do a threshold in order to get this proc, because what it's kind of saying is, okay, I actually hit this target for a relevant amount of damage. I'm already contributing a strong amount of damage to this target, to this potential kill, and that's where we're going to invest our extra damage. It's not like Ludens, where you know, maybe I hit the wave and do nothing. Maybe I hit one target and it spreads to the wave and basically only does like 1/6 of the damage that it could potentially do. If you go to Ludens, it says maximum 174 with this thing. That would actually be divided by 6. Well, yeah, well, no, okay, so yeah, sorry, because it's the repeat bounces on the thing, but it has a chance to do like a relatively low amount of damage to the primary target if there's enough targets around, right? And you don't really have that problem with Stormsurge. You hit the target, you're basically able to choose the target too in cases like where you have your ult and you can actually pick a target. Most of the time the first shot could even proc this on a squishy target, definitely by the second shot. And you're basically just picking out the target you want to have your extra damage on there. So the burst is a lot better than people think, and we're gonna like compare this to just some other options. Okay, so we'll line everything up here. We'll shoot the dummy, and we'll see what it does. Okay, so 790, right? And then we will come back, and we will put on a Shadow Flame here. Okay, still have everything, yeah. And just to show you guys, this dummy is 40 MR, and it's like 1700-ish health. So I tried to make it like what you would have at around 2 items. It might not be exactly correct, but it's about close enough. Again, it's 2026, and we haven't really figured out how to, you know, manually be able to adjust things in the practice tools. Just a really difficult thing that Riot can't just figure out, you know, so we have to adjust things by increments of 10. Yeah, it's just really sad. So we're doing the Shadow Flame here, and you see we're at 659. So substantially weaker. Now, granted, we're not taking into account the Cinder Bloom passive here, right? So you're going to do more damage on that shot when Cinder Bloom is active. But keep in mind that with Xerath, I often like to think of Xerath as a fight starter. That's where he's best. It's not that you can't end fights. It's not that building Shadow Flame is bad. I actually build this a lot. I tend not to build it second, though. But the reason why I love Stormsurge is because on that opening target, right, we'll kind of go back and we'll grab it again. On that opening target, it's actually going to do more damage. So yeah, so 659. Yeah, 757. And it's quite a substantial amount as well. And people, when they test these things, they love to kind of put a dummy out there, right? We'll just toss another one down. And they just start, like, doing everything. Like, they'll, you know, throw their whole combo at it, and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, look at the damage with these items, and look at the damage with that item. And then we'll, like, press R here, we'll dump all the shots on it, or something like that, right? And the problem really is that in a lot of cases, you're just not able to hit all your abilities. And in cases, it's not even really, are you good enough to do it? In some cases, it's just really difficult. I mean, all of Xerath's shots can be easily walked out of. The character is essentially balanced around that, right? If that wasn't the case, you know, you'd be unplayable to face in the game. So you're doing a lot of predicting, but even if you predict properly, there's things like dashes, flashes, tons of things that are going to be making it difficult for you to land like all your ultimate shots. It's unlikely you're going to be able to full combo a lot of people that are actually squishy for a lot of these tests, right? So full comboing a tank, generally pretty easy, but a lot of times you're going to be sniping with your Q, maybe using your W at range. So these kind of one-off shots on the dummy are quite good. And obviously this is where Stormsurge shines the most because you're doing kind of the one-off damage. Keep in mind, though, that even without the Squall, remember, it's 102% gold efficient, and the stats really hold up. You still have the pen, you still have the ability power, so the offense is there, and you have the movement speed, which is making pretty much everything else possible. And it's at a cheaper price than Shadow Flame, and like I said, a lot of the times, you're not really getting the bonus on Shadow Flame, right? Your best case scenario is your opening fights. You want to be opening fights with your ult in most cases. You want to be the guy doing the chip damage at the start with your Q, right? You're not sitting there waiting to kind of snipe people at low HP. Sometimes it happens, right? And in those cases, Shadow Flame is great. Again, not downing Shadow Flame, and I do build it later on in the build. But for my second item always, I go Stormsurge because it matches the pen, very similar amount of ability power, very cost effective, great movement speed, right? Which is kind of enables us to just play more aggressively in general, play safer, helps us retain stacks, and just adds great priority damage with Stormsurge on an item. So that's why I think Stormsurge is super underrated on Xerath. Try it out if you haven't. It was something I was really skeptical about. I won't lie. I was looking for new builds, and I was kind of like, this item seems like it has potential because I wanted a pen item that was relatively cost effective and cheap. And I saw this, and I was like, the movement speed is actually quite good. And then I was like, is the proc good? It's actually not that bad because it is priority damage, whereas a bunch of other things get wasted, like I was saying. So it's going to be probably hard for me to convince you from a video, but try it out in a couple games. You'll notice the movement speed right away, and it's going to make the game feel so much better for you. Now, I told you about some other tech, right? So a couple things. This isn't as useful on Xerath, in my opinion. This is going to be something we talk about a bit more in the Vel'Koz videos, but I will just show you for the sake of being complete here. So we have a Blackfire Torch. Now, this could be a Liandry's. Actually, I'm just going to get a Liandry's. Probably better. So normally, you hit something with Liandry's, it ticks for however many seconds, 3 seconds, and then it's done, right? But watch what happens when you use Stormsurge with an item like Liandry's or Blackfire. So the delay causes another Liandry's proc. So you actually get an insane amount of damage, especially on like a one-off ability. Now, obviously, this isn't happening multiple times. It's got a 30-second cooldown. It's a weakness of it. But this can be incredibly strong. And again, not so much on Xerath, just because I tend not to build these items. I tend to go more max AP. But, you can build this other item here, and you'll see that it does a crazy amount of damage when we have double burn that gets reprocced. Just waiting to make sure everything's good. Okay. And it actually will reproc both of these, as you can see. And it's doing an absolute obscene amount of damage. Now, like I said, I don't really recommend this on Xerath, in my opinion. It's more of a Vel'Koz thing. The Torch can replace Ludens, so if you really want to execute this kind of extra burn strategy, you can replace Ludens with Torch. The problem is that Ludens actually still does more damage, even than reprocking the Torch. I can actually probably show you guys right now. We'll just do that really quick. So we'll sell this, and then we'll do one with this setup, and then we'll do one. What we're going to do, too, is we're going to put other dummies around here. We'll put like, I think if I put another one, it's going to reset. But we'll put a couple other dummies. We're going to hit this one. And this is going to show you an unideal situation because some of the Ludens procs going to be wasted on this. And it should still do more damage than the Blackfire Torch reset, I believe. So. Okay, so 722, right? Okay. And then we'll kind of come in here. We'll wait. Blackfire Torch. Make sure this is, we got 5 more seconds. I could actually reset the cooldown, I think, but oh well. We're already at 20 minutes. I wanted to make this a quick video. But yeah, so 722. Yeah, so you see we don't quite hit even 722 with this combination, so it's better to just do the Ludens in my opinion. And there's a lot of other reasons why you might want to go Ludens. Like I said, I'm going to make a separate video about that. Another one is that Ludens kind of tags everything, which is really great on Xerath because it gets you assists, which is great for things like Darksteel. Again, we don't have Darksteel in this calculation because you can't stack things in the silly practice tool, but you guys kind of get the point that we're going after. And one final thing about the Stormsurge item before we cut the video is the magic pen at the point in the game that you get it is huge in my opinion. This is why a lot of people, when they go Ludens first, they'll tend to go Shadow Flame second. And Shadow Flame second is not a bad option. It's very similar to Stormsurge actually. Like the thought process is the same because you get way more damage from that next 15 penetration than from the first 15 penetration, because how it works is the more magic resist you pen, the lower the number goes, the more damage they're taking. So if you have, let's say, 40 MR, right, and you subtract 5, you're not really doing that much more damage. But if you subtract 30 MR from 40, so the 15 plus the 15, and you only have 10 left, now you're doing a ton more damage, okay? Because every point you remove that's closer to getting the person to 0 is worth more and more mitigation percentage. So that's why building a pen item second is great. And, you know, in this particular case, we're building it for the movement speed as well, right? But that's why you kind of want to build it second, because you already have the 15 from the boots. And if you go and build something like, let's say, we'll kind of just compare this really quick before we kind of end the video. We're already so over, but I kind of want to make this thorough. So we're going to, can I remove specific dummies? I don't think so. It's fine. Yeah, so what we'll do is we will we'll target this dummy, right? And okay, so 722 again, right? And then what we're going to do is just sell this and go with this. And we're going to do drastically less damage, not only because of the proc though, right? Because we don't have the penetration. So we're actually good to go because we have our first strike back up. And yeah, so way less damage because not only are we not getting the proc on the Stormsurge, but we just don't have the extra pen as well, which is doing a ton of work in the damage calculation. So just some final thoughts there, and I hope I've made the case. Oh, the last thing I want to talk about, yeah, so the situations where I wouldn't build it. The only reason to really not build the Stormsurge, in my opinion, is to do with what your final build needs. So let's say you were going against a really tanky team. Okay, and we'll take a little bit more time to round this out properly. What are some of the items that you're going to want to have? Well, you're probably going to want to have either Ludens, the Torch, or Malignants. Now, we'll make a video where we go over which one's the best. I still believe it's Ludens, but there can be arguments made for Malignants. But one of those is what you're going to want, right? For you need mana, you need a mana item. Then Shadow Flame, great, right? Void Staff, you're going to want Void Staff. You're going to want Rabadons, okay? And the problem here is that you see we basically have all of our core, right? We have Pen, okay? We have Percentage Pen, which is very important because even if a tank is not building MR, they have such a high base MR that this will not be wasted. Like you're doing optimal damage by building Void Staff here. So Void Staff is like never wrong against a tanky team with like actual tanks on it. In some cases, it's not even going to be wrong against a squishy team, depending on what you build. But it's certainly not going to be wrong against a innately tanky team, even if they don't build a single MR item. So we have the mana item, the pen item, which is essential, the death cap, which is essential because it's a multiplier. We have the boots, and we have the shadow flame. Now this is the one item you could swap out, but you're kind of losing a lot in terms of the everything on your final build, right? So you're losing the ability to crit below 40%, which is kind of huge. Typically, what ends up happening when I build Stormsurge is I go Ludens, Stormsurge, Rabadons, then Shadow Flame, or you could go Shadow Flame, then Rabadon. The order there can be kind of depending on what you have access to at a given time. That's completely fine. So you basically end up getting both the items. But in a build like this, you can't afford to get both because you're probably going to want Liandry's as well, right? So a lot of times you don't have room for it. Now, if you're playing bot, your boots will be here. So if you have a true 6-item build, you could put Stormsurge in here, but you'd actually be better having a Darksteel. And this is, again, kind of the problem, too, is that even if, let's say you're not playing bot and you're playing mid, right, you're probably going to have a Darksteel somewhere in here anyway, right? So what's probably going to happen is you're probably going to not have this, and you're probably going to have a Magi's, and your build's probably realistically going to look something like this. So you just don't always have the room to add in Stormsurge, especially if you're playing something like mid. If you're playing bot, again, you just have a little bit more space, right? But even then, I wouldn't really recommend it against a super tanky team bot. When would I recommend it against a tanky team? Well, let's say you're getting a lot of pressure. Let's say it's a tank that can dive you very easily, and you think the movement speed is going to be essential to helping you escape. That's one scenario where I would build it even in spite of them being tanky, because you living is incredibly important, and people underestimate how important it is sometimes just to live as a control mage, especially if you're in the game, you're a threat, you're doing tons of damage to them. They're going to be trying to take you out. Now, movement speed isn't always a panacea, right? There are some things that can just kind of get on you regardless. You have some like really kind of broken things like Kled, for example, right? They're just going to run you down. In any case, you have things like Nocturnal. So movement speed won't always save you. So something to keep in mind when we're talking about these movement speed items. But in the games where people can't just instantly get on you, and it is more about you kind of being run down after the fight, or, even run down by champions that are fast, but not like uber fast. Like, let's say like a Lilia. Like, movement speed works great against a champion like Lilia because she's faster than you, certainly, but she's not always in the super movement speed mode, right? Because she has to stack. And even when she is, if you are at 450 movement speed, you're buying yourself time. Keep in mind, you're already at range. You're not playing in melee range, right? So you have to think of it as movement speed as buying yourself time against these champions that want to close the gap on you very quickly, right? And it's just an incredibly powerful stat. Like I said, it helps you dodge things, which is also just fantastic. But even if you don't get so much damage out on a fight and you spend it running away, if you don't die, or you die at the very end when you've wasted a ton of the time from their jungle, or maybe their jungle top or something like that, if multiple people dive you, your team's cleaning them up. And then, even if you die at the end, you've wasted so much time. They can go get an objective. They can maybe clean up the people who dove you. This kind of all sorts of things. And the longer you stay alive, the more likely you're able to bring other people into the fight and make the fight messy. So you're drawing them away from your team. You're drawing them into a potentially bad situation for them, right? Where maybe your teammates can help you out more or stuff like that. And even if they can't, like I said, your team just has the upper hand in terms of collapsing on them. So movement speed's super underrated. Trust me, guys. Try this build out. You're going to love it. Like I said, the only time I wouldn't build it is against crazy, crazy tanks. But other than that, it's fantastic. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy stuff like this. And we'll keep making more videos. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time. I don't know why I can't. So.